I love you, but sometimes you're a piece of shit. Of course I'm talking about Owlboy, whose titular hero finds himself the punching bag of a frustrated mentor right off the bat. Try as hard as you can, but Owlboy's kinda defeatist story arcs will ensure you're screwing everything up somehow. Even though the developers certainly didn't. The game is a milestone standard for pixel art, an outstanding piece of presentation and polish. I'm serious. The artists held themselves to the kind of suicidal high standards that you rarely see outside of fully funded perfectionist Japanese professionalism. If you want to see the very best pixel art and animation of all time, play Metal Slug, play King of Fighters 13, and also play Owlboy. Owlboy is a side-scrolling action-adventure whose design takes heavy cues from feel-good Nintendo staples like Metroid and Zelda. But we're definitely leaning harder on the Zelda here, complete with wispy little dust swirls, combat that's really heavy on the freeze frames, a character that spins around and faints when he dies, and block puzzles. Lots and lots of block puzzles, which seem like kinda the only puzzle in there, but I'll get to that. Until then, Owlboy tries its hardest to borrow and recreate the magic fuzzies he got from the more premium Nintendo franchises. Enemies and friends are cute characters who live around this cute little village you gotta fly away from to go on a cute little adventure that occasionally has you rollicking through some set-piece stunt scenes that for some reason reminded me of watching the Goonies as a kid. Okay, just listen to this overworld theme. Can you hear the sheer amount of 90s adventure happening? The game looks amazing. The knack for hand-drawn pixel shading here is something you're not gonna see anywhere else, thanks to a 9-year development cycle that actually gave them the time to paint so many beautiful pixels into this thing. The story drives you through a visually diverse set of levels at a smooth, brisk pace via a narrative driven by the player's actions, which probably involves screwing everything up somehow. In between breaks of empowering projectile combat that feels good to blast your way through, and will probably have you dying no more than just 2 or 3 times if you ever get stuck on anything, and all of that is good. It is perfectly fine evidence that Owlboy is a polished product, but that precedes another question just as important to me as to whether or not it's polished, which is, what's something new that this game brings to the table? The more you look into that question, the more Owlboy seems to just kind of end up grasping at straws. The tricks of its own it does have turn out to be kind of underutilized by the end. For starters, combat is conducted by partners who shoot their guns and gadgets at bad guys for you. They teleport in and out of your arms at a button's press. Tying the player's toolsets to the buddies of our main character reinforces the story's themes and can have that toolset drastically change to suit the narrative beat. Because while Owlboy, the video game, might have overtones of sunshine and blue skies, Owlboy, the backstabbing killer, is stone cold. Well, it's that slow flow, D-O-double-G. But enemy designs rarely seem to go beyond basic bullet sponges who slowly home in on your area as you circle strafe around them. The one other big gimmick I can single out here is that you can fly. Of course, you are an Owlboy. You can just press a button to fly up in the air, consequence-free forever, which means all of the promise that an open blue sky full of adventure is going to be covered in ceilings before you get too high, as it gradually narrows down into dungeons of puzzle rooms whose solutions are too easily projected. And between that combat, which is spammy and spongy, and the puzzle solving, which is gamey and samey, creates an overall experience that quickly had me feeling like I was just going through the motions. Which is really a problem of level and enemy design. If our moveset here is entirely focused on flying around to pick things up from the ground for progress, then it would seem more like a fit for the game to be heavier on vertical puzzles about picking things up that stack or interact with each other or the environment. Which, to be fair, Dungeon number 1 and half of Dungeon number 2 do spend some good time with. You have to pick up and pour buckets of water to fill holes and douse enemies who turn into other grabbable items themselves that you can use to smoosh other enemies, which is solid game design. You have to think creatively with the variables it gives you for a creative solution. On the other hand, flooding a room with poison gas that you turn off by hitting the only switch in the adjacent room is kinda lazy and kinda boring to play, and this is the formula most puzzles follow. The example I mentioned earlier is the exception. Oh, and by the way, it turns out that from most angles, you could just shoot those fire lizards all along. It's actually way faster than dousing them and tossing away their shells. Why even bother? Owlboy also moves super slow and recovers super fast from a quick dash, so why even bother flying from A to B when you could just mash dash? A few hours of just hearing that dash noise all the time kinda left me disillusioned. Kinda ruins the mood. If you've played a lot of Zelda clones, particularly 2007's Aquaria, and noticed how a lot of them turn into long tunnels of glaringly signposted simple puzzle solutions, you might end up like me and not really getting the appeal of Owlboy. It just feels like there's a bit of a mismatch going on here. The aesthetics and style evoke the feeling of a vast, epic adventure that ultimately lasts just 3 dungeons over a handful of hours and a very cramped overworld map. The limited scope of your abilities in the puzzles also suggest a smaller experience, but incredibly long and melodramatic story scenes really pad out the drama, but our cast isn't meeting the threshold of charm and humor needed to make the characters truly appealing. So maybe it's just trying too hard to be Zelda, in which case I can't really feel like I'm going on a grand adventure into the exciting unknown here when I really just feel like I've been there and done that. The problem with polishing and presenting a new recreation of something that worked in the past is that unless it also innovates, it's not really raising anyone's standards. I mean, this may raise consumer standards for pixel art and polish in the Western indie market, but it doesn't make a more deeply inspiring change, the kind of change that causes genres to evolve over time. Which may be another telltale sign of the game's 9-year-long development cycle. Of course, this stuff would have felt fresher had it come out before 2012. Now, it has to somehow find a place next to Fez and Shovel Knight and Hyper Light Drifter. It sets out to prove that indie games can do Zelda as well in a market where Zelda itself is becoming overshadowed by the Souls franchise, and the indie market has already responded in kind. Of course, Owlboy wasn't this team's only project during the past 9 years, but if you just care about seeing good pixel art, it may be one of the most profound projects of the past decade. If you wonder why pixel art this ridiculously gorgeous doesn't come out more often, consider that the 9 years spent making it created a 7 to 10 hour experience whose gameplay lags behind. And for me, gameplay always comes first.